The Omega Sector Sharpshooter Invitational had been the galaxy's premier marksmanship competition for roughly 2 millennia, give or take a few centuries, depending on which calendar system you trusted. Nobody really kept perfect track anymore, because when you had 400 participating species, each with their own concept of time, you eventually just shrugged and said it's been a while, and left it at that. The tournament existed primarily for 3 reasons. First, to showcase the incredible precision capabilities of the galaxy's most advanced species. Second, to provide a neutral ground for civilizations to measure themselves against one another without actual warfare. And third, because apparently everyone in the universe enjoyed watching other people try to hit tiny objects from absurd distances. Some things were truly universal. This year's competition was being held on Station Pinnacle, a massive orbital platform that hung in space like a very expensive wind chime that nobody could hear. The station had been built specifically for sporting events, which meant it had excellent facilities, terrible food, and the kind of unnecessary architectural flourishes that suggested the designers had been paid by the geometric shape. The competitor roster read like a biology textbook written by someone with a flair for the dramatic and a complete disregard for pronounceability. The Krell were there, naturally, 7-foot-tall insectoid beings whose compound eyes could track a photon across a solar system, or so they claimed at parties. They'd won the tournament 6 times in the last 20 years, which they considered proof of genetic superiority rather than just being really good at one specific thing. The Vexothians had sent their champion, a crystalline entity named Prismac, whose entire body was essentially a living targeting computer. Prismac refracted light through 17 different internal facets before processing visual information, which meant by the time they decided to shoot, they'd already calculated every possible trajectory, including the ones that violated known physics. The Hurlon delegation brought 3 competitors, because Hurlons believed in redundancy the way humans believed in coffee. Each Hurlon had 6 arms, 12 fingers per hand, and a neural network that could coordinate all of them simultaneously while also doing their taxes. They were extremely difficult to beat at any physical competition and extremely annoying to play cards with. Then there were the Scarith, the Yenix, the Quor, and about 40 other species whose names all sounded vaguely threatening, and whose biological advantages made human evolution look like it had given up halfway through and decided to go with good enough. And then there was the human. Her name was Mackenzie Ruiz, which immediately caused problems because half the galaxy's translation software tried to render Mackenzie as either a military rank or a type of fishing equipment. She'd given up correcting people, and now answered to basically anything that sounded close enough, which included Mac, Kenzie, that human, and on one memorable occasion, Lieutenant Fishing Equipment. Mac stood in the staging area wearing cargo pants with an alarming number of pockets, a faded jacket that had Earth Forward Scouts stenciled on the back in letters that had seen better days, and an expression of supreme unconcern that made the aliens around her deeply uncomfortable. Humans weren't supposed to look that relaxed. They were supposed to be nervous, out of their depth, apologizing for having the audacity to exist in the same competitive space as their betters. Instead, Mac was eating something from a wrapper and nodding along to music only she could hear through earbuds that looked like they'd survived at least 2 small explosions. "I remain unconvinced this is not an elaborate joke," hissed Crystal, a Krell whose compound eyes were currently focused on Mac with about 700 different lenses of disdain. Humans have binocular vision. Binocular. 2 eyes, positioned forward, with a field of view barely wider than their own face. It's like competing against someone who's already blindfolded. His companion, a Vexothian named Shardlight, whose crystalline body chimed softly when they moved, refracted agreement in several colors that the translation software rendered as extremely snooty purple. The statistical analysis is conclusive. Humans rank 204th in visual acuity among spacefaring species. They cannot perceive ultraviolet or infrared without technology. Their reaction time is adequate at best. They are, by any reasonable metric, unprepared for this competition. And yet she qualified, pointed out Crystal, which was the problem. Mac had qualified. Not spectacularly. Not in a way that made anyone nervous, but she'd scored high enough in the preliminary trials to earn her spot in the main tournament. The galaxy had collectively decided this was probably a fluke, or possibly humanity had bribed someone, or maybe the scoring system had glitched. Nobody wanted to consider the alternative, which was that a human had legitimately earned their place through skill. That would be inconvenient for about 400 species' collective self-image. The opening ceremony was the kind of overproduced spectacle that happened when you gave event planners an unlimited budget and insufficient adult supervision. There were holograms, pyrotechnics that somehow worked in vacuum, and a speech from the tournament commissioner that managed to use the phrase precision excellence 12 times in 4 minutes, which might have been its own kind of precision. Mac stood with the other competitors, still nodding to her music, apparently unconcerned that she was representing her entire species in front of an audience of roughly 3 million beings across 7 different viewing platforms. When they announced her name, butchered it, really, but she was used to that. She gave a little wave that was somehow both casual and vaguely disrespectful. The crowd's response could be generously described as polite confusion. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of non-binary configuration," announced the commissioner, a Threxian whose vocal structure made everything sound like a movie trailer. "Welcome to the Omega Sector Sharpshooter Invitational. Over the next 3 days, our competitors will face challenges that test the very limits of precision, accuracy, and nerves of metallic alloy. The first round was called the Distance Gauntlet, which sounded dramatic but essentially meant hit targets that are really far away. The targets were positioned at ranges from 1,000 to 5,000 meters, in conditions that included vacuum, artificial atmosphere, and something called chaotic medium, which was just fog that moved in mathematically annoying ways. The Krell went first because they'd won the right to buy winning last year, and also because they never shut up about wanting to go first. Krikstal stepped up to the firing line with a plasma rifle that probably cost more than a small moon and definitely had more computing power than most planets' educational systems. The weapon synchronized with his compound eyes, each lens feeding data into a central processing unit that calculated windage, drift, gravity, and probably what he was having for dinner. The first target appeared at 1,000 meters. Krikstal fired. Dead center. The crowd made appreciative noises. 2,000 meters, center. 3,000, center. By the time he reached 5,000 meters and split the target perfectly, the crowd was ready to just hand him the trophy and go home early. "Adequate," Krikstal announced, which was Krell for "I'm amazing and you all know it." Other competitors took their turns. Prismac the Vexothian turned every shot into a light show, their crystalline body refracting targeting lasers in 17 directions, before consolidating data and firing with mathematical precision. A Hurlon competitor used 3 arms simultaneously to operate their weapon, because apparently using one arm was for amateurs. The Scarith representative had to be reminded not to eat the targets. Then it was Mac's turn. She approached the firing line, carrying what could only be described as a gun, in the same way a cave could be described as architecture. It was a ballistic rifle. Chemical propulsion, no plasma, no lasers, no computing power beyond basic scope magnification. It looked like something from a museum exhibit titled, "How did anyone hit anything with these?" Is that Shardlight's crystalline form actually stopped chiming? Is that weapon using kinetic projectiles, chemical combustion, to propel metal through air resistance? Confirmed Krikstal, his compound eyes somehow managing to look horrified despite being made of thousands of individual lenses. It's practically medieval. Mac settled into position, checked her scope, made a minor adjustment, and fired. 1,000 meters. Hit. Not center, about 2 centimeters left, but a hit. The crowd made a noise that wasn't quite applause, but wasn't quite laughter either. Encouraging, in the way you'd encourage a child who just spelled their name almost correctly. 2,000 meters. Hit. 3 centimeters right this time. The crowd's encouragement became slightly more strained. 3,000 meters. Hit. Dead center. Wait, what? 4,000 meters. Hit. Center again. The crowd went quiet in that specific way that suggested they were collectively questioning whether reality was functioning properly. 5,000 meters. Mac took her time with this one, adjusted for what looked like wind even though they were in a controlled environment, squeezed the trigger with the kind of gentle pressure usually reserved for defusing bombs or petting unfamiliar cats. Hit, center. The silence extended to about 4 seconds, which was an eternity in sports watching time, before someone started the polite applause that suggested confusion and possible concern. Fascinating, said Mac in a tone that suggested they found it anything but. The human compensated for variables that shouldn't exist in controlled conditions. Probably luck, Crickstall decided. Statistical anomalies happen. The next round will expose the truth. The second round was called adaptive targeting, which was commissioner speak for we're going to make this really annoying. Targets moved, teleported, changed size, and occasionally fired back with harmless marker rounds just to test the competitor's focus. It was the kind of challenge that required split-second decision-making and the ability to track 17 different variables while someone shot paint at your face. The Krell loved it. Crickstall scored 94% accuracy, which would have been perfect except for 3 targets that teleported at the exact moment he fired. He blamed the targets for being temporally inconsistent, which was apparently now the target's fault. The Hurlons scored even better, using multiple arms to track different targets simultaneously, while their neural networks did math that would make computers cry. Watching a Hurlon compete was like watching 6 people work in perfect harmony, except it was one person and they were showing off. Mac approached the course with the same casual attitude she'd shown all day, like she was heading to the grocery store rather than facing a challenge that made most species military training look easy. The first target appeared. Mac tracked it, led it by what looked like pure guesswork, fired, hit. The second target teleported. Mac fired at empty space. The target materialized exactly where she'd aimed. Hit. That's impossible, stated Shardlight flatly. She fired before the target's position was determined. That violates causality. Maybe she guessed, suggested someone. Nobody's that lucky. Except Mac kept doing it. Target after target, moving, teleporting, shrinking, and she just compensated. Not with computer assistance or probability matrices or compound eyes. She watched, adjusted, fired. The pattern repeated with the kind of mechanical efficiency that suggested either supreme skill or possibly witchcraft. By the end of the round, she'd scored 89%, which put her in 4th place overall and directly in the we can't ignore this anymore category. The third round brought out the big guns metaphorically, since all guns were theoretically the same size, though some were more expensive and smugger about it. This was the Chaos Pattern Challenge, where competitors had to hit targets while the environment actively tried to kill them. Well, not kill. The tournament had strict regulations about that after the incident in year 476 when a competitor actually died and it caused a diplomatic nightmare. But the environment could make you wish you were dead, which was close enough for entertainment purposes. Gravity fluctuated. Lighting changed from blinding to pitch black in random intervals. The air pressure shifted. Strange sounds played to break concentration. It was like shooting while having the worst migraine in 3-star systems. Competitors dropped like flies, which was unfair to flies who were generally quite good at not dropping. The Krell struggled because their compound eyes, while excellent for normal conditions, got confused when lighting changed faster than they could adapt. The Vexothians' crystalline bodies refracted the random lighting into disco shows that blinded them. The Hurlons did better but still looked distinctly uncomfortable, which for a Hurlon meant they'd stopped doing 7 things at once and could only manage 5. Mac walked into the chaos chamber, waited for the simulation to start, and then did something remarkable. She closed one eye, just covered it with her hand, leaving herself with half her already limited binocular vision, and proceeded to hit targets with a kind of casual accuracy that suggested this was actually easier for her now. What is she doing? Crickstall's carefully maintained composure cracked like his favorite targeting computer. Why would you eliminate half your visual input? Depth perception simplification, someone's science officer suggested from the crowd. By using one eye, She eliminates binocular convergence, confusion, and relies on monocular cues. Humans apparently learned this for activities called hunting before they achieved spaceflight. That's barbaric. That's working. By the end of round 3, Mac had moved into second place overall, trailing only Krikstal by a narrow margin. The mood in the competitors' area had shifted from dismissive to confused to something approaching concern. There's still the final challenge. Krikstal reminded everyone who was listening, which was most people because anxiety was contagious. The absolute shot. That will separate the truly elite from the lucky. The absolute shot was the tournament's signature finale, the challenge that had only been successfully completed 9 times in 2,000 years. It was considered the ultimate test of marksmanship, requiring not just skill but integration with technology, biological superiority, or possibly divine intervention. The rules were beautifully simple. Hit a target the size of a human fingernail from 1 kilometer away while blindfolded. The execution was nightmare fuel. Commissioner Threxian explained the challenge to an arena that had somehow packed in even more spectators than the previous rounds. The target is positioned in a sealed chamber. No electromagnetic radiation penetrates. No quantum sensors. No probability fields. You cannot see it. You cannot scan it. You must hit it blind. How? Asked a rookie reporter. Is that even possible? It mostly isn't, the commissioner said. Cheerfully. That's what makes it exciting. The setup took 2 hours. The sealed chamber was positioned at precisely 1,000 meters from the firing line. The target, a small ceramic disc the size of a fingernail, was placed in the chamber's center by 3 different judges who each verified its position. The chamber was sealed, scanned, and confirmed to be completely isolated from outside observation. Then came the blindfolds. Standard issue, triple verified, impossible to see through blackout material that even ultraviolet or infrared vision couldn't penetrate. Each competitor would be blindfolded, given 30 minutes to prepare, and allowed 1 shot, just 1. The betting pools had reached figures that would embarrass small nations. Not 1 credit was on Mac, because while she'd surprised everyone by making it this far, nobody, absolutely nobody, believed a human could complete the absolute shot. Krikstal went first, because of course he did. His preparation was elaborate. He connected neural interfaces to his plasma rifle, synchronized residual memories of the chamber's position, and ran probability calculations based on atmospheric conditions, gravitational microvariations, and the tournament commissioner's breakfast choices, because at this level you included every variable. The blindfold went on. Krikstal stood perfectly still for 3 minutes, his compound eyes useless behind the fabric, his entire consciousness merged with his weapon's targeting computer. He fired. The display showed his shot's impact, 4 centimeters left of target. The crowd made a sound like air escaping from a balloon. 4 centimeters might as well have been 4 meters. This was the absolute shot. Close didn't count. Unacceptable atmospheric variance, Krikstal announced to anyone who would listen. 0.001% outside standard deviation. This chamber has calibration issues. Prismac the Vexothian prepared with the kind of precision that made Swiss watches look sloppy. They ran 17 different spectrum analyses before the chamber was sealed, memorized every photon's trajectory, calculated quantum probability fields that might indicate the target's position through sheer statistical likelihood. Blindfold. 3 minutes of absolute stillness that made statues look fidgety. Fire. 6 centimeters high. Prismac's crystalline body made a sound like glass cracking. The quantum foam was insufficiently accounted for. This is a measurement problem, not a shooting problem. Or, suggested that same unhelpful spectator from earlier, you missed. Competitor after competitor tried. A Hurlon used 6 arms to stabilize their weapon and still missed by 8 centimeters. A Scarith fired and hit the chamber wall, causing a brief panic about structural integrity. A Yenix competitor got nervous and fired straight into the ground, which was at least memorable. 23 attempts, 23 failures. The closest anyone came was 3 centimeters, which earned a standing ovation and still counted as complete failure. Then they called Mac's name. She walked to the firing line like someone heading to return a library book, not someone facing a challenge that had humbled the galaxy's finest marksman. Her chemical propulsion rifle looked even more primitive next to the arsenal of failed advanced weaponry. She had no neural interfaces, no quantum computers, no compound eyes or crystalline probability calculators. "Will you require the full preparation time?" asked Commissioner Threxian, trying to sound neutral but definitely expecting the answer to be yes. "Gimme like 2 minutes," Mac said. She unslung her rifle, checked the chamber habit, probably, since she'd checked it 40 times already, and then did something that made the entire arena collectively furrow whatever they had that approximated eyebrows. She pulled out a small bag of chalk, carpenter's chalk, the kind you used for marking measurements. She opened it, dabbed some on her fingers, then reached out and touched the firing platform's edge, leaving a small chalk mark exactly where her hand had rested. Then she stood there, rifle held loosely, and closed her eyes. Not because of the blindfold yet, just closed them voluntarily. Her breathing became steady, measured, the kind of rhythm that suggested either meditation or someone falling asleep standing up. 30 seconds passed. She opened her eyes, marked another spot with chalk, then checked her rifle's position against both marks. "I'm ready," she announced. "That's it? Crixtall couldn't contain himself. "That's your preparation? Chalk marks and breathing, proprioception reference points, and establishing baseline stance," Mac replied, which probably didn't clarify anything for anyone. "Ready when you are." The blindfold went on. Triple verified, completely opaque, turning Mac's already limited human vision into nothing at all. She stood there, rifle raised, breathing normally. She wasn't calculating, wasn't running probability matrices, wasn't doing anything except standing there like someone waiting for paint to dry. Then she said something that made the translation software briefly crash. "This is gonna be so stupid if I miss." And fired. The arena's display system had a 3-second delay, because the judges needed time to verify the shot's impact with 7 different sensors to prevent disputes. Those 3 seconds stretched like taffy made of pure tension. Then the display lit up, dead center, perfect bullseye. The arena experienced what could only be described as a collective existential crisis. 700,000 beings across multiple viewing platforms simultaneously tried to reconcile what their sensors confirmed with what their understanding of reality allowed. Several Krell fainted, which medical staff had previously insisted was biologically impossible for their species. A Vexothian's crystalline structure developed a crack from pure shock. Someone dropped a very expensive beverage, and it fell in slow motion like a metaphor for everyone's shattered worldview. Commissioner Threxian's vocal apparatus produced a sound somewhere between a cough and an existential scream. "That's how did. The mathematics don't." Mac removed her blindfold, blinked a few times to adjust to the light, and shrugged. "Lucky shot." "A lucky?" Crixtall had abandoned all pretense of composure. "You performed the absolute shot. Only 9 beings in 2,000 years have accomplished this. You can't dismiss that as luck." "I mean, I practiced," Mac admitted. "But yeah, lot of luck involved." "What practice?" Prismac demanded, their crystalline form refracting confusion in 7 colors. "You cannot practice for the absolute shot. The target position is secret. The conditions are unique. There's no way to muscle memory." Mac interrupted. "I spent about 6 hours yesterday standing exactly here." She pointed to her chalk marks, aiming at exactly that distance, dry firing about 800 times. "Built up the proprioceptive memory, so my body knew where to point without thinking." Silence. "But you couldn't see the target," someone protested weakly. "Didn't need to see it." Mac patted her rifle. "See, everyone got so focused on all the things you couldn't do, couldn't see through the chamber, couldn't scan it, couldn't calculate that you forgot about the one thing you could do." "Which was?" pressed Crixtall. "Remember where they put it." More silence, somehow even more silent than the previous silence. During the setup, Mac continued, "I watched the judges position that target. I noted the exact center of the chamber, memorized the angles, the height, the distance. Then I practiced pointing at that exact spot until my body remembered it without conscious thought. Humans are really good at spatial memory. It's how our ancestors used to hunt before we had all the fancy stuff. She gestured at her rifle. Then I did something else your computers didn't account for. I used proprioception, body awareness, and kinesthetic memory. Those chalk marks, reference points. My body knows where it is in space relative to those marks. I can reproduce my stance within millimeters because I practiced it 800 times. But the variables, Mac started. Yeah, there are variables. Wind, gravity fluctuation, atmospheric density, all that. But here's the thing about muscle memory and human neurology. We autocorrect. My cerebellum was making micro-adjustments the whole time based on sensory feedback I wasn't even consciously processing. It's the same system that lets us throw a ball accurately or catch something without calculating the physics. She hefted her rifle. Also, and this is the fun part, I've been shooting since I was 11. My uncle taught me on a ranch where targets moved, wind changed, and nothing ever held still. You learn to feel the shot more than calculate it. Your body understands things your brain can't explain. A Hurlon in the audience raised 3 of their 6 arms. But that's barely even technological. That's primitive muscle coordination. Yeah, Mac said, grinning. Wild how that works sometimes, right? You all spent so much time integrating with computers and running probability matrices that you forgot humans learned to hit targets about 1 million years before we invented math. We're persistence hunters. We don't give up, we don't overanalyze, and we've been throwing rocks at things we wanted to eat for longer than most species have had civilization. She looked at Krickstall directly. No offense, but your fancy targeting computer is trying to do in nanoseconds what my brain's been training to do for 30 years. Sometimes experience beats processing power. The award ceremony was uncomfortable in the way that formal events became uncomfortable when someone's entire worldview had been thoroughly disassembled and left in pieces on the floor. Mac received her trophy, a crystalline sculpture that probably cost more than her ship's annual maintenance, with the same casual grace she'd shown throughout the competition. Mac, she posed for photos with various dignitaries who all looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Answered questions from reporters who seemed personally offended by her existence, and somehow managed to make the whole thing look easy. Any advice for aspiring marksmen across the galaxy? Asked a Threxian journalist whose vocal structure made even simple questions sound like they should be answered by philosophers. Mac thought about it. Practice. Like, a lot. I know everyone wants some secret technique or special insight, but mostly it's just doing the same thing 1,000 times until your body knows it better than your brain does. Also, sometimes the simple answer is the right answer. Not every problem needs a computer to solve it. But surely, Krickstall interjected, having recovered enough composure to attempt saving face, you must acknowledge this was an exceptional circumstance. In actual combat, against prepared opponents with superior technology, your primitive methods would fail. Mac looked at him for a long moment. You know about the Battle of Proxima Station, right? Krickstall's compound eyes somehow managed to look uncomfortable. The one where 12,000 Krell Marines, equipped with the finest targeting computers and plasma weapons your civilization had ever produced, got bogged down by 3,000 human defenders using ballistic weapons and what you called suicidal tactics. More uncomfortable eye-looking. The battle where we held that station for 6 weeks, despite being outnumbered 4-1, because we understood something you didn't. That sometimes warfare isn't about who has better technology. It's about who's more willing to adapt. Krickstall said nothing, which was probably the smartest choice he'd made all day. I'm not saying human methods are better, Mac clarified. I'm saying different approaches work for different situations. You have amazing technology, use it. But don't assume it's the only way, and don't assume that just because something is simple, it's inferior. She paused. Also, maybe don't laugh at people before they compete. It's rude, and it makes you look really silly when they win. As the ceremony concluded and crowds dispersed, still arguing about what they'd witnessed and whether it counted, Mac made her way back to her ship. It was called the Lazy Sunday, which was a perfectly normal name, and anyone who said otherwise was being judgmental. The ship was small, efficient, and held together primarily through spite and regular maintenance. She settled into the pilot seat, placed the trophy in a storage compartment where it clinked against 3 others from different competitions, and queued up navigation for Earth. Her comm chimed immediately. Message from Admiral Torres, probably wanting a full report or possibly just congratulations. She'd read it later. Right now, she had a 3-week journey home and a playlist of about 6,000 songs she hadn't gotten through yet. As the lazy Sunday pulled away from Station Pinnacle, Mac allowed herself a small smile. Let them analyze the results, argue about methodologies, try to figure out how a human with 2 eyes and no quantum computers had beaten the galaxy's finest marksmen at their own game. They'd probably conclude she'd gotten lucky, or that the challenge was flawed, or that muscle memory didn't count as real skill because it wasn't sophisticated enough. They'd be overthinking it, which was basically the galaxy's favorite hobby. Her secondary comm pinged. A message from someone named Crixtal, requesting an interview for a training manual about alternative marksmanship techniques. Mac laughed and set the message to read later. Maybe she'd do the interview, maybe not. Either way, it was nice being asked instead of dismissed. The ship jumped to FTL, leaving behind a station full of beings who'd learned something important about the difference between sophisticated and effective. Some would remember the lesson, most wouldn't. But that was fine. Mac had her trophy, her playlist, and 3 weeks of uninterrupted peace to look forward to. Back on Station Pinnacle, tournament organizers gathered for an emergency meeting about preventing spatial memory exploitation in future competitions. They spent 4 hours debating whether to require competitors to never see the chamber, whether to randomize target positions, even from judges, or whether to just ban humans entirely and deal with the diplomatic incident. They eventually settled on making the rules more complicated, because that's what committees did when faced with problems they didn't understand. 3 systems away, at the Krell Military Academy, a new training module was hastily added to the curriculum. Why simple methods sometimes defeat complex technology? It was mandatory for all tactical students and was taught by an instructor who'd watched the tournament and had an existential crisis about his species' approach to warfare. His opening lecture included the phrase, "Never underestimate beings with only 2 eyes," which became the class motto and appeared on unofficial merchandise. On Earth, in a small town in what used to be called New Mexico, Mac's uncle watched the tournament broadcast on his old screen and nodded approvingly. He'd taught her to shoot using that same rifle, the one with chemical propulsion and iron sights and nothing fancy. Started her at 11 years old, hitting cans off fence posts, learning to feel the trigger and breathe properly and trust her body's memory. He called her mom to say the kid had done good, then went back to his porch and his coffee and his own rifle that hung over the mantel. It was the same model Mac had used, still functional after 40 years, still accurate despite being what the galaxy called primitive technology. Sometimes primitive was exactly what you needed. 6 months later, 3 different species sent delegations to Earth requesting training exchanges for their military marksmen. They wanted to understand human shooting techniques, particularly the proprioceptive memory system and kinesthetic adaptation methods. Earth's military, after consulting with people who actually did the shooting, translated this as, they want to learn how to practice and set up basic training courses that emphasized repetition, muscle memory, and the radical concept of not overthinking every single shot. The alien students struggled initially because they kept trying to integrate computers and probability matrices into exercises that were specifically designed to teach instinctive shooting. Eventually, some of them got it, others went home convinced humans were collectively insane and succeeded through pure stubbornness rather than skill. Both groups were partially right. Mac, for her part, competed in 2 more tournaments that year, won one and placed 3rd in another, and generally maintained her reputation as that human who beat the absolute shot. She gave a few interviews, declined several book deals, because who had time for that, and continued doing exactly what she'd always done, showing up, practicing extensively, and treating impossible challenges like they were merely annoying. Years later, When historians documented the Omega Sector Sharpshooter Invitational's greatest moments, Mac's absolute shot appeared in every top 10 list. Some accounts called it the triumph of determination over technology. Others described it as statistical impossibility verified by multiple sensors. A few honest ones admitted, "We still don't entirely understand how she did it, but the trophy doesn't lie." Mac, if asked, would probably say she just got lucky after practicing really hard, which was somehow both modest and completely accurate and frustratingly unhelpful all at once. But that was humans for you. They'd learn to do impossible things, insist it wasn't that impressive, and then do it again just to prove the first time wasn't a fluke. They'd compete against species with biological advantages that should make victory impossible, find the one angle nobody else considered, and exploit it with the kind of cheerful efficiency that made advanced civilizations question their life choices. And sometimes, just sometimes, they'd remind the galaxy that having the most sophisticated technology or the most advanced biology didn't automatically make you the best. Sometimes being really good at something simple beat being adequate at something complex. Sometimes muscle memory defeated quantum computing. Sometimes 2 eyes were enough. And sometimes, when everyone was busy laughing at someone's aim, you should probably wait to see if they actually miss before declaring victory. Because humans had been hitting targets for a very long time, and they'd gotten pretty good at it. Even blindfolded.